Well, what are pulses? They're very important to human food consumption. The pulses of interest to us are chickpeas, which are also known as garbanzo beans. Dry beans are used quite a bit around the world and in North America. These are of the Phaseolus genus. Lentils, uh, you'll see the representative photos of each of these appearing on the right side of your screen. Dry peas are also known as field peas. Broad or fava beans, fava just means broad. Pigeon peas, and cowpeas. Now, pigeon peas and cowpeas are primarily used outside of North America. They are not much traded between countries as they are used within countries. In North America, black-eyed beans are probably the best known pigeon peas. I'm sorry, cowpeas. Pulses that are important to food formulation, we'll focus only on three categories that are very important to North America: chickpeas or garbanzo beans, as we addressed before. Dry peas are available in yellow or green varieties primarily. These are the two most important commercial varieties. And lentils, which are available in a wide selection of varieties differing in color and flavor. These are the three varieties most commonly used in North America. They're regular lentils, Pardina lentils, and red lentils. Well, as we mentioned before, pulses offer exceptional nutritional value. Um, of the three pulses of interest to us, dry peas, lentils, and chickpeas, you'll note that they have very high levels of protein ranging from 2 to 26%. I'm sorry, 23 to 26%. That puts them somewhat less than soybean flour, which is another legume, but considerably higher than cereals such as wheat, rice, or other sources of flour such as tapioca flour. They are very, very low in fat, and that's going to be important with respect to their value in extruded products. But they are also high in carbohydrates and starches, which is another distinguishing factor between them and the other legumes such as groundnuts, peanuts, or soy flours. And they are very good sources of fiber. Our focus in this while we should also not overlook the other nutritional benefits, they have a superior amino acid profile, which was addressed in a previous webinar. Very high in vitamin content, especially vitamins of interest today, such as folate, high in minerals. They have a low glycemic index. We'll talk a little bit more about that in this webinar. And they are non-GMO, which is becoming increasingly important in many sectors of the food industry here and abroad. Our focus is on carbohydrates and how they affect their performance, especially in extruded products. Well, where are they grown? North America is a very important source for pulse production. The United States is one of the premier pulse producing regions in the world. And under here, you can see that the level of production is very high. We rank 9th in the production of dry peas, 5th in the production of lentils, and 16th in the production of chickpeas. The United States also provides a very superior production, manufacturing, and distribution infrastructure, which is very important because right now, in international trade, the quality parameters, standardizing the quality parameters of pulses is becoming more and more important the more that they are used in all regions of the world. The United States also boasts multiple university and technical centers to provide technical support and innovation to companies looking to develop products using pulses. Because of our very highly developed quality grading, handling, and production control systems, U.S. pulse producers have been able to receive top dollar for their pulses in world export markets by offering a very uniform and high quality product. Pulses as food ingredients, well, they can be processed into a variety of different ingredients. Looking at the three pulses of interest to us, the dry peas, chickpeas, and lentils, They can be processed into flours, flakes, pastes, and also pulse cereal blends of different compositions. They can be fractionated into protein concentrates and isolates, into starches, and also into bran fiber fractions, or they can be further processed into particulates, including extruded particulates. Very important variable in the processing of pulses, as is the case with soybean, is that you need an enzyme inactivation step in order to inactivate lipase and lipoxidase enzymes that can lead to the development of flavors. Be sure that when you interact with your suppliers of pulse ingredients that you do inquire about enzyme inactivation. Our focus for this presentation, however, will be on starches. We've spoken about protein ingredients in a previous webinar, and the bran fiber components we will address to a lesser extent in this presentation, but the focus shall be on starches and their role in extrusion. What are the pulse ingredients that we can work with? There's a wide range of options available to the product developer. Available pulse ingredients today include whole pulses, roasted pulses, which will have inactivated any enzyme activity, flakes, grits, raw flours, air classified flours. That's an interesting development. The classification of milled pulses can be controlled to control the ratio of protein to carbohydrate in these flours. Pre-cooked flours and pre-gelled flours. Pre-gelled flours have been run through an extrusion process already to enhance certain of their functional properties. We have protein concentrates, protein isolates, starches, bran meal, and fiber ingredients. And just to give you a list of pulse ingredient suppliers, I should point out that these this entire presentation will be posted at the USA Dry Pea and Lentil Council website, so you'll be able to access this later and get names of these suppliers as well as website addresses. Going to section 2, which will focus on pulse carbohydrates, I'd like to ask you or draw your attention again to Mackenzie Femright's email address. If you do have any questions after this webinar that you'd like to address to her or a request for further information, Mackenzie will be very happy to address any of your inquiries. In this section on pulse carbohydrates, we'd like to talk about carbohydrate composition of pulses, the alpha galactosides, which are oligosaccharide materials found in pulses, and the glycemic index of pulses. Looking at the carbohydrate composition of pulses, if we look at peas, lentils, and chickpeas, now these numbers come from a separate study, and these numbers will vary a bit from the numbers that I gave you previously, but we're dealing with numbers that are effective within ranges. The starch content of these pulses will vary from batch to batch, season to season, as they will with any other agricultural material. But using these numbers, total starch contents of peas, lentils, and chickpeas range from 39% in the case of peas up to 50% in the case of chickpea. And the total dietary fiber, as you can see, varies. The total dietary fiber includes both soluble and insoluble fiber, with insoluble fiber being the primary component. The primary component of pulses insoluble fiber is cellulose. Soluble fibers will vary depending on whether they are part of the bran or if they are part of the cotyledon of the pulse seed, but they include pectins and other soluble fiber ingredients that show high functionality in foods. The alpha galactosidases, which are oligosaccharides. Raffinose is a 3-sugar oligosaccharide, stachyose a 4-sugar, and verbascose is a 5-sugar oligosaccharide. These are present in low levels in peas, lentils, and chickpeas. And these are the oligosaccharides that have been associated with, let's call it, intestinal discomfort that can occur if you eat raw beans. However, most alpha galactosides can be removed if you pre-soak pulses or pulse flour in water. And if you extrude, especially high temperature short time extrusion, that can cause further destruction of the alpha galactosides. So you can buy pulse ingredients that have been pre-soaked if you don't want to pre-soak them yourself, or in any case, this is a component that is entirely manageable. And then we have mono and disaccharides, fructose and sucrose, present in very low quantities. Now that's important because when you deal with high temperature reactions or dehydration reactions such as happen in an extruder, you have to be concerned about Maillard browning reactions. And if one of the attributes of pulses that is of interest to you is the nutritional value of the proteins, Maillard browning can reduce the protein value. But there are very few sugars available to cause Maillard browning reactions. Looking at the glycemic index of pulses, the glycemic index of pulses is relatively low. If we look at white bread, for example, or instant mashed potatoes, they have a glycemic index value of 85 in the case of mashed potatoes or white bread, and white bread being 97, so very close to the maximum of 100. However, if we look at even chickpea starch, straight starch, you're going to get a glycemic index of only 50. And if we looked at boiled red lentils or boiled peas, which would be expected to increase the glycemic index of these products because boiling accelerates their hydration, we find that they have very low glycemic index values, 32 in the case of red lentils and 22 in the case of boiled peas. So the glycemic index of these ingredients will change depending on what kind of processing conditions they are subjected to. And if we start looking at purified starches and subject the starches to a lot of hydration and expansion of the starch granules, we should expect that their glycemic index will increase. But they do provide a very low starting material. If we look at the glycemic index of pulses, we have to ask, well, why is the glycemic index so low? And one reason is that the starches contain a very high fraction of resistant starch. In peas, according to this study done by published in 2008, the resistant starch as a percent of total starch is 30.8% for peas, 31.6% of total starch for lentils, and 19.8 or close to 20% for chickpeas. So you have a very high level of resistant starch present in the pulses. But I believe that another factor is also that these starches are closely intertwined with significant components of protein and dietary fiber, which will also serve to reduce the glycemic index. If we look at pulse ingredients and how they perform in extruded products, we'll start with providing some background, looking at the basics of extrusion processing, the role of starches and proteins in extrusion, and the use of pulses in, or the application of extrusion to produce puff cereals and snacks using pulses. And then we'll look at an example of low shear, low temperature extrusion in the manufacturing of pasta. Well, let's start with a definition of extrusion processing. Extrusion processing is a process whereby you take a dough, a heterogeneous dough, and plasticize it through a combination of temperature, moisture, shear, and pressure into a homogeneous material. The ingredients are first combined with water and tempered to ensure uniform water distribution, and then the dough is fed and conveyed through a barrel that has a screw auger, and the configuration of the screw can apply different levels of mixing, shear, pressure, and also create internal temperature through the action of friction. All this causes the dough to plasticize under varying conditions into a plastic material, if you want. The dough exits a die plate through holes configured to yield specific densities and shapes. The pressure under which it exits a die plate is, of course, a major variable into the type of products that you will produce. A cutter at the die plate then cuts the existing dough streams into desired lengths. Here's an example looking at the basics of extrusion. We start with just adding ingredients and water into a mixing unit, and then adding the mixing unit into a feeder that feeds it through a screw, whereby it then exits at the die to give you your product. The products produced through extrusion range from high shear products or high temperature short time extrusion, as it's known, all the way down to low shear products. The products that we can produce using extrusion range from puff snacks at very high temperatures and shear conditions, snack and cereal pellets, which can be puffed through putting into hot oil or into a microwave, or smeared into pellets like corn flakes are, for example, produced. They're also used to produce animal feeds to improve the nutritional quality of animal feeds. They're used to produce ingredient flours, textured vegetable proteins as we reduce the amount of shear to which the extrusion process is configured. Going into lower shear products, we see confectionery products appearing, and then also pasta. So we'll talk about products that either extreme, puff snacks and also pastas. Factors that impact extrusion include processing variables such as barrel temperature, the barrel length, the screw configuration, the speed of the screw, and the nozzle diameter and pressure. We also have formula variables, which include percent moisture, moisture distribution, the tempering period to which the dough is submitted, protein ingredients, lipid ingredients, sugar type and quantity, salt. These are all important variables that can be used to control the extruded product qualities, and dough viscosity and dough temperature. And then we have raw material variables, the particle size of the raw material, the starch content and composition, protein content and type of the raw material, and the physiological structure, or the physical structure, I'm sorry. Factors we'll look at are barrel temperature, percent moisture, and the distribution of moisture in products. And we'll also look at the starch content and composition and the protein content of the extruded doughs and how the pulses affect those. So looking at starches and high temperature short time extrusion. There's two major forms of starch, amylose and amylopectin, and they behave differently in extruders. In this study, which was published in 1988, they looked at model systems using native corn starches, and what they were able to find is that the amount of amylose really affected the expansion of the extruded particles. Looking at the expansion ratio on the left, you see that it reaches a peak at about 50% amylose in the starch, and that there was generally a high performance at between 25 and 50%, looking at expansion ratio. Now, if we look at temperature, the role of temperature in high temperature short time extrusion, we get some more insights into the role of amylose, especially. Looking at temperature ranges from 136 to about 165 degrees, we find that the greatest expansion was achieved using 50% amylose, but that it's in a very narrowly defined peak. If we look at a 25% amylose system, now this is using model systems, we find that the 25% amylose reaches not quite as high a peak in terms of expansion, but it just shows a higher degree of robustness. That means that there's not as severe a change in expansion ratio depending on the temperature variation. What we'd like to do is suggest that at 25% amylose, you end up with a product that is more robust than the 50% amylose formulation. Now, if we look at the role of moisture in high temperature short time extrusion, again, using model systems, we find that these are model systems based on varying types of native corn, which differ in the ratio of amylose to amylopectin. We find that, again, in the range of 25 to 50% amylose composition, you get the highest degree of expansion using a range of moisture between 11 and 15% of formula weight. So we're starting to build some guidelines where we should expect to see optimum performance. In this case, as well as before, the 25% amylose shows itself to be somewhat more robust, as you can see by a slightly flatter curve in the range of 11% to 15% moisture than you would expect, than you see with 50% amylose. What about proteins? How do they affect high temperature short time extrusion? Well, a study conducted back in 1982 using model systems based on wheat starch, Fabian and Hosny noticed that the more wheat gluten that you added to this model system, the further that you reduced particle diameters. So the expansion was reduced the more wheat gluten that you added to the formula, and there was a slight bounce back as you started approaching 17%, at which point we must assume that they're starting to develop textured vegetable protein or textured wheat protein. But the other thing that they noticed is that as the particle diameter decreased, the strength of the particle also decreased with wheat gluten. So if we were to look at just this data, we would conclude that addition of protein in the form of wheat gluten is deteriorative to the quality of the particle size and strength, which is not what we want. But not all proteins are alike. For example, when they looked at soy protein isolate, they found that it behaved very differently than wheat gluten in extruded doughs. What they found with wheat gluten, or with soy protein isolate, excuse me, is that there was actually a range between 5% and 8% where the addition of soy protein isolate gave a very definitive boost to the particle diameter, and also ended up improving on the strength of the particles. So soy protein isolate, and I should point out that soy is a legume as well, so the proteins would expect to be more similar to those found in pulses. What we found with soy protein isolate is that it would actually, at a certain level, be expected to enhance the expansion of the extruded particle as well as increase the strength of the particle. So conclusions that we would take from these model system studies is that in the formulation of high temperature short time extruded products, an optimum amylose content to maximize expansion and pellet robustness is in the range of 25 to 50% of total formula. Robust, by the way, is just another name for tolerance. Expansion can also be enhanced through the use of certain proteins, for example, 5 to 8.5% soy protein isolate. We're not suggesting that you need to use soy protein isolate in your extruded product, but that the proteins found in pulses might be very beneficial to extrusion properties. And also the pellet strength can be enhanced through the use of certain proteins. Optimum moisture ranges appear to be between 11 and 15%, at least of these ideal model formulations, and that an optimum expansion could be expected to be reached when the barrel temperature is between 135 degrees and 165 degrees centigrade. Additional considerations in formulation include the grain particle size, which affects how well the particles temper and the distribution of moisture in the dough. The milling techniques, some very interesting work has been done at research centers identifying the variation in performance based on how pulse flours were milled. Presumably this occurs because different milling techniques affect pulse starch granule integrity in different ways. Lipids, you want to stay away from lipids when you're extruding, as lipids tend to really reduce expansion and strength of extruded particles. And then also the physical and chemical configuration of starch and protein molecules. As we mentioned before, one of the reasons that the glycemic index of pulses is so low is because there is a tight configuration between the starch, protein, and dietary fiber components of the pulse flour. Also, protein inactivation and Maillard browning, which will be a factor of the amino acid and the free amino acids, and also the free sugars that are available in your dough. And the starch and oligosaccharide breakdown. For example, we mentioned that stachyose and raffinose are destroyed not completely, but very significantly as they go through high temperature short time extrusion based on some studies that were done in South Africa recently. And then there are other ingredients that will affect the properties of your extrusion. So these must all be considered when putting together formulas using pulse flours that are to be put through an extruder. Well, let's go back to starch pulse composition. If we look at the dry peas, lentils, and chickpeas, we find that they have very significant levels of protein. And although I have not seen the studies, if they have been done, that relate specific pulse proteins to extrusion properties, I suspect that that data will be available before too long. We also have very low fat levels, and again, this augurs well in favor of extrusion expansion properties. And we have very high levels of starch and sugars, in the 40 to 50% range generally for peas, lentils, and chickpeas. And we have fiber. And we will talk a little bit about what may be the role of fiber in extrusion performance. Peas, chickpeas, and lentils contain very high levels of starch and protein that will affect extrusion properties of the pulses. That's the main takeaway that I would leave you with as we start looking at some more details. By comparison, corn is used very commonly as a material for extrusion expansion, and the starch content of whole corn is about 74%. So about 50% higher than it is for pulses. If we look at the starch composition of pulses, remembering the importance of amylose, we find that the amylose content of peas, lentils, and chickpeas, according to this study done in 2010 as part of a thesis at the University of Saskatchewan, we find that the amylose content for peas, lentils, and chickpeas is in the 24 to 33% range. So that brings us right into that sweet spot that we identified earlier for maximizing expansion properties. In terms of the total starch in the formula, the amylose therefore ranges from 50% to 65% of total starch. However, you can further modify expansion properties when you start looking at combinations of pulse flours with other high amylose ingredients, such as corn, for example. Now, what we'd like to turn to now is a very valuable resource in the development of knowledge on pulses as ingredients, and that's the Northern Crops Institute based in Fargo, North Dakota, and associated with North Dakota State University. In particular, we're very appreciative of two of the personnel affiliated with North Dakota State University and the Northern Crops Institute, and that is Professor Cliff Hall and also Nagy Jaradashashai, who is, both of them have been invaluable in helping us put together this webinar presentation. What we'd like to refer to is work that they have undertaken at the Northern Crops Institute. Here's one study that we will draw from heavily, completed in June of last year. And looking at the process that they used, again, to revisit the extrusion process that we described earlier, what they did was took they took pea flour produced by passing yellow or green peas through a hammer mill and sifting through a 40 mesh. Then blending it with 14.5 to 16% moisture, so a little higher than the optimum moisture that was identified for the model systems based on cornstarch. Passing the blended and therefore tempered flour through a Wenger TX52 twin screw extruder with a cutting blade, producing particles that were then dried in an impingement oven. And I should point out, in an industrial process at this point, it might be diverted to for the application of seasonings and other flavors or coatings. And then the products were taken for evaluation. Looking at two types of particles that were produced in their studies. They produced crispy rice type particles, small particles, looking at different blends of lentils, peas, and chickpeas with corn flour. And what we find is that although the optimum expansion was achieved with 100% corn flour dough, they got very close to that level of expansion, looking at 50-50 blends of lentils with corn. If you look at the chickpeas, you got a very different performance. So the type of pulse in this case is a very important variable. Certainly it can be said that with lentils and corn, very good expansion was achieved. An interesting factor here that I'd like to draw your attention to is the difference that was in expansion for crispy rice type of particles that was achieved using yellow peas versus split yellow peas. When you use split yellow peas, you're removing a major part of the fiber component in the form of the bran. So the split yellow peas are going to have a lower total dietary fiber content. And in this case, removing that fiber content had a negative effect on the expansion properties of yellow peas. So we're getting some indication of how the dietary fiber of pulses does contribute to expansion in this example. However, if we look at larger particles, extrusion particles, or corn in the form of corn puff types of products, we see a somewhat different relationship. In this case, the expansion achieved with 50-50 blends of pea and corn and lentils and corn, or in this case, chickpeas and corns, was lower than with corn. They were still very respectable degrees of expansion, measured in the form of bulk density or milligrams of displacement per 100 grams of product. What can we take from this? Well, in this case, chickpeas and lentils performed very similarly. So depending on the type of product that you're trying to extrude, the individual pulses will behave differently. And here was another interesting observation, is that when we looked at yellow peas and split yellow peas, in this case, as a reminder, split yellow peas having a lower degree of dietary fiber because the bran has been removed. In this case, there was no difference observed in the expansion properties of the peas. Well, how does high temperature short time extrusion affect amino acid profile? In many products, it will reduce the amino acid profile because of Maillard browning reactions. But as we mentioned earlier, pulses have very low levels of free sugars available to react with amino acids. So in this study conducted by the Northern Crops Institute, they found absolutely minimal effect on the amino acid profiles of extruded products versus raw products. So we can conclude that when using pulses, you can expect very little deterioration of the amino acid profile, depending, of course, on what other free sugars might be added to the formula. And the high temperature short time extrusion of pulses is not new. The Northern Crops Institute has picked up products from around the world, including Southeast Asia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, that show that some people are already producing products that contain pulses and that are showing good levels of expansion and puffing. Now, an intermediate level of extrusion in terms of shear, pressure, and generally harsh conditions is the development of texturized vegetable protein, or TVP. And we're including this just to show that it can be done. The Northern Crops Institute has produced products as viewed below, and they reference studies by Wang et al. From an article or a paper published in 1999, whereby they were able to achieve meat-like textures from textured vegetable protein produced from pulses. And then we go down to the opposite end of the spectrum with the low shear extrusion of pulses. Work done at the Northern Crops Institute using a base formula of 100% pulse flour, whereby they blended the dry ingredients, added water, mixed the product together, and extruded them into pasta particles. They were able to look at the various properties of such pulses, and we'll talk about them, but at first I'd like to show you just some photos of the pilot plant that they have available at the Northern Crops Institute in order to do such work. Looking at pasta, one of the things that they found is that by increasing the level of protein incorporation, or I should say pea flour incorporation into a pasta dough from 0 to 20%, they were able to increase significantly the cooking firmness or al dente quality of the pasta as they increased the pulse proportion of the dough. And as they increased the pulse proportion of the dough, they also increased the cooking firmness, and the while having no loss in the cooking loss or no effect on the cooking weight. So it might be said that the more pea flour that was incorporated in the pasta, the more robust that the formula became. A key to producing gluten-free pasta, according to our sources in the industry, is that you might want to pre-gelatinize the starch prior to extruding. That's where you're going to get the best pasta qualities. And also, according to some of our industry resources, adding 0.5 to 1% calcium sulfate will further increase the al dente texture and robustness. But I should tell you that there is a patent pending on this, and you should contact me if you have any further inquiry with regard to this application. How do pulses affect pasta color? This is photos of pulses that have been produced using 10% yellow pea and 10% green pea flour. There will be an effect on the color, but very slight at this level. However, the color can also be a very positive quality if you want to add some innovation. Here's an example of gluten-free pasta, which whereby a dough was mixed, extruded, and cut, and you get a very pleasant orange-red color from a blend of 50% red lentil and 50% yellow pea. Using pulses can give you a lot of varieties in coloration in pulses. Now, how does using pulses affect nutritional claims? Well, it can be a very dramatic positive effect. Here's a formula for gluten-free organic lentil pasta. If you looked at the now the rack value, or the reference amount commonly consumed, is the standard serving size as defined by the USDA. For pasta, it's 55 grams. So what do we get if we make a lentil pasta, 100% lentil pasta? We get a pasta that's got 13.5 grams of protein per serving. And the daily, the DRV value for protein is 50 grams a day. So in order to make a claim for protein content, a nutrient content claim for protein, you need to meet 20% of that value in order to obtain an excellent source of protein claim, which this does. 20% of the 55 grams is less than 13.5 grams, so we exceed that level. With this pasta, we can make an excellent source of protein claim. And we should also mention that at this point, it's got a very high level of dietary fiber, 8.4 grams of total dietary fiber per serving. The DRV value for fiber is 25 grams a day, so we would have to exceed 5 grams per serving in order to make an excellent source of dietary fiber claim. So by using lentils to make a gluten-free pasta, we're able to not only make it gluten-free, but also an excellent source of protein, an excellent source of fiber. And we shouldn't overlook the contributions of all the other micronutrients that are contributed by the lentils as well. If we look at the vitamins and minerals, riboflavin, calcium, vitamin B6, iron, thiamine, niacin, and folate, we find that one serving will provide 20% of the daily value for calcium, 40% of the daily value for iron, 20% for thiamine, and 30% for folate. So this makes for a very healthy, nutrient-packed product. I did omit 25% of the daily value for zinc as well. So let's go to a review of where we've come thus far in our webinar program. And a reminder that if you do have any questions to pose after this webinar, please take Mackenzie Femwright's email address down below. And I see there is a typo. There is no L. It's mfemreite@plentil.com. So let's look at pulses. The fact that they're going mainstream and center plate. Let's review the allergen adverse and gluten-free qualities of pulses. We've been able to show in previous webinars that they are economical egg and dairy protein ingredient alternatives, and that they offer very high nutritional quality and also versatile ingredient functionality. And then we'll close out by just talking about some of the product formulas that we haven't addressed thus far in this presentation. Well, pulses are going mainstream and they are going at center plate. We find them now in soups, pastas, salads, chilies, bakery tortillas, pastes and dips like hummus, and in a lot of main dishes. So they are working their way into the North American cuisine very effectively and very quickly. But we're also seeing that they're branching out into many other categories: breakfast cereals, beverages, extruded snacks, nutrition bars, protein supplements, baked sweet goods. We believe that this is a very early stage to the trend toward increased pulse consumption and their attraction to consumers. The market for gluten-free and allergen-averse foods. There's been a lot of talk about the gluten-free market. We believe that the food market projections for gluten-free and allergen-averse foods are understated. And one of the reasons is that we've noticed that a lot of people tend to refer to well-noted studies by Packaged Facts and the SPINS Mintel surveys, which are based on product scans at major retail outlets, but they do not include outlets such as Walmart, which is about 15% of all the retail food and food service sales today, Trader Joe's, restaurant and food service, store brands, PLU, or coded entry sales, are not included in these statistics, and multi-level marketers and internet sales are also not included, which we believe collectively represent a very, very major part of all gluten-free or otherwise allergen-averse foods that are sold. Our own estimate at Best Vantage, adjusting for these factors, is that the current gluten and allergen-free market size is about 10 to 15 billion, with the potential to reach 70 billion by 2020. This may seem like a very large number, but it's actually less than about 5% of the of total food sales in the United States. U.S. Food Allergen Labeling and Consumer Protection Act of 2004 required that all foods containing these allergens had to be labeled for their content, and this was based on the assumption that, or the estimation that these allergens were responsible for 90% of all food allergies. So any foods that contain any of these ingredients in any form would be required to label the presence of these ingredients as allergens. However, pulses can play very important roles as ingredient alternatives to those allergens that are marked in red. This was the subject of one of the previous webinars that you can access on the USDA and Lentil Council website. We found that people will pay premium prices for gluten-free foods. We found that for rolls and buns, based on the spot check in the Chicago market, those premiums can be as high as 251%. For breads, 227%. For pasta, 141%. For crackers, 97%, which gives product developers a lot of leeway for formulation. But one of the factors that we pointed out was that if you're going to replace wheat or any gluten-containing products with ingredients, with replacement ingredients, they should at least be nutritionally equivalent, or you would run the risk of compromising the nutritional brand image of gluten-free foods. Looking at an example that was developed at Best Vantage for a client, looking at a gluten-free shortbread, the ingredients that were used to replace wheat were tapioca flour and rice flour. So replacing 30% of a gluten-free blend of tapioca and rice flour with lentil flour resulted in a doubling of the protein content from 1 to 2 grams per 30-gram serving, and increasing the total dietary fiber from 0 to 2 grams. So where there was no dietary fiber of consequence before, now we were able to offer 2 grams per serving. That was a major dietary improvement. Also, pulses can be very valuable as egg and dairy alternatives, both egg and dairy being identified allergens, but there is also an economic value to that. Pea flour has the 24% protein, which provides a lot of the properties that are contributed by egg or dairy proteins in foods. The starch, present at 45–50%, also provides properties, contributes properties that are associated with egg and dairy proteins. Then we have insoluble fiber, which provides nutrition, humectant C, thickening, and mouthfeel. Soluble fiber, a lot of properties contributed by the soluble fiber protein. And then we have the brands, which are the combination of insoluble fiber and soluble fiber in pulse brand ingredients, provides many of those attributes of dairy and egg proteins as well. Looking at cakes, we recognize that cakes are very sensitive to ingredient properties. Work done at North Dakota State University, they developed some white cakes made from eggs, pea protein concentrate, and pea protein isolates, And as you can see here, the cakes from the surface look all pretty similar to one another. Looking at cutaways of these cakes, we find that they come pretty close to the control made with liquid egg, and especially when using spray-dried pea protein isolate or freeze-dried pea protein isolate that was prepared at North Dakota State University. With the pea protein concentrate, there's a slight reduction in volume and more yellowish tinge, but also remember that pea protein concentrates can be lower in protein content than will be the pea isolates. But in any case, very similar products were able to be generated by replacing liquid egg. But pulse proteins are also very price competitive. If we look at the 10-year price trends for dried whole egg, dry dairy, and pea ingredients, we find that there's a considerable amount of variation in price over time. But if we look at peas, which is the bottom line that you see at the bottom of this, this chart, this graph, you find that the price is only a fraction of, the raw material price is only a fraction of what the dairy and egg ingredients are. But it's not just a matter of price, it's also a matter of price volatility. If you have a product that contains ingredients subject to high swings in prices, that can threaten the economic viability of that product. So if you look at the price of proteins, dried whole egg powder versus pea proteins, for example, we find that the average price per kilogram is much lower when you're looking at peas as a raw material for protein ingredients. So we're starting at a very low base. But if we look at the volatility of prices measured as plus or minus 2 standard deviations from the mean, the volatility over this period of 2001 and 2010 was measured in cents, whereas for the milk and egg ingredients, it was well over $1. So you're going to not only start with a much lower priced ingredient, you're going to start with an ingredient that has less volatility and therefore will render your product less susceptible to price variations in the marketplace. Looking at other formulas that we discussed in previous webinars, we also talked about pulse-based egg wash and binder, looking at 100% replacement of the egg for an eggless tempura batter. What we were able to find is that we could substitute 100% of egg or dairy ingredients in developing these washes for battered and fried foods. In beverages and smoothies, we covered just basically the basics, which is you have to consider the isoelectric point of proteins. The isoelectric point for pea, chickpea, and lentil proteins is about 4.6, at which point the proteins will precipitate or flocculate in your product. That's not a good thing. The solubility characteristics of these proteins will also depend on how the proteins were processed. Pre-extruded pea flours or proteins will also solubilize much better. The pulse protein solubility is about 20% if the pH is less than 3 or greater than 5.5%, and it's about 50% if the pH is even more acidic at less than 2.5 or more basic at greater than 6.5. Well, what does that mean in practical terms? I should point out you might want to use organic acids to control or buffer your pH. But what that means is that if you're going to develop beverages using pulse ingredients or pulse proteins, milk and sweet whey would be right in that sweet spot where you would have the maximum amount of solubility for pulse proteins. With coffee, same thing with orange juice or Coca-Cola, which are very low in pH. If you look at coffee, root beer, and apple juice, it starts to get a little shaky. You're in the 5 to 7 pH range for coffee, for example. So coffee beverages, you should expect a lower level of solubility, but you should not try to mix pulses with yogurt or vinegar-based products because that's too close to the isoelectric point. You're going to have problems achieving desired solubility. Looking at some model beverage formulas that were developed, looking at a combination of pea protein isolate and water with flavorings, you're able, and some very simple mix instructions, you're able to develop a beverage that offers 16 grams of protein per serving, which makes it an excellent source of protein. For beverages and smoothies, a chocolate flavored protein beverage, again, using pea protein isolate water and cocoa powder. Now, with cocoa powder, you want to have some level of suspension, so it's recommended that you add some Gelan gum or other gum in order to make the product a little thicker and better to sustain dispersed cocoa particles. But in any case, an additional recommended step is that it be homogenized. The instructions are provided in the lower left-hand column for making a prepared beverage. As with the previous formula given, this one offers 17 grams of protein per serving, which makes it an excellent source of protein. So to summarize, we'd like to just provide a very quick summary, identify some resources, go-to resources for you if you want to continue work in this area, and then also give some credits to the people who've helped us out in this program, and take your questions and answers. Summary and conclusions. Pulses and chickpeas and lentils are going mainstream. They're held to very high quality standards. And fascinating conversations provided. We've spent long times having great discussions with them. And at Wenger Manufacturing, especially Mr. Christopher, or as we know him, Topher Dole, for his superb technical guidance on the ingredient function of various products in extruders. For future reference, this presentation will be posted to www.p-lentil.com/archives. You can also find the previous presentations that have been given in this four-part series. We recommend that you access them for any of the details that you might have missed in today's presentation. And we would also like to give you a notice that the Northern Crops Institute will hold an extruded snacking, and they will cover such topics as pulse milling, factors that affect pulse extrusion, nutrition, the role of proteins, starch, color chemistry, and as well as extruded product trends. If you're interested in pursuing this, please visit them at the www.northern-crops.com website, and they provide further details. I don't know that this has been posted yet in their education program, but you can certainly get more details by contacting them directly. So at this point, I'd like to leave it over to questions, if anybody has any questions. Mackenzie?
Can you hear me, Dan?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, good. I've been having
I can
some
hear you.
connection problems at where I am at. So we do have some questions. Some How do you think pulse flours and pulse protein will affect the expansion during direct extrusion and indirect extrusion?
If you could tell me what you mean by indirect extrusion, that would be very helpful. I mean, the interaction of the protein, we've already been able to show that soy protein isolate, for example, had a very positive contribution to the expansion properties and also helped to strengthen the particle, the extruded particle. Now, how that's going to affect your formulation will also depend, also, of course, on the other ingredients that you have present. But yes, the only thing that I can say is based on what we've presented thus far, both protein and the starch composition will be critical factors.
Okay, and one other thing before we move on, Dan, I forgot to mention is that there should have been a survey that popped up after the webinar, and if everybody could do that, that would be great. If one did not pop up, there will be a survey monkey sent out to you, and that would be really great for our reporting for the grant. But next question.
We will be very, yes.
Next question, do you suggest to combine pulse flours with high amylose or low amylose corn?
I would recommend that, first of all, the simple answer to that is try them all, because your specific formulation will, of course, give you different results depending on what the other ingredients present are. But I would say, based on what we know, working with a high amylose corn flour will give you more flexibility, because the amylose content does seem to be an important variable, and the higher the amylose content in the corn, the less of the corn you will need in order to get your desired properties.
Great. Okay. And are there any studies or literature that describes the milling techniques that affect the starch integrity of the pulse flours?
Yes, and I would actually, there's been some very good research developed on that up at the Canadian International Grains Institute, and I would recommend that you contact them for more details on that work. The milling technique will affect the extrusion properties of your pulse flours. There's no denying that. And I would say that this research is recent enough that it's probably too early for me to draw any conclusions and give you a bullet point answer, other than to say that it is an important variable, and that I recommend that you contact the researchers that have been working on this.
Okay. That's great. And I do have some other questions here. And I feel with time, we should probably wrap it up, but we will email you guys directly. I'll send these questions over to Dan and actually to our technician at NAGI at NCI. And we will get answers to your questions, because I think on my end, my webinar, the GoToWebinar, is actually starting to shut me down. And so I just figured we should probably move on. But I did write down your questions before they hopefully don't force close me. But I will make sure that we get your questions answered. And I do have your emails because you guys signed up for it.
I would like to also point out for those that joined the presentation late, we ran into some technical difficulties due to an internet service shutdown at the USA Dry Pea and Lentil Council. So Mackenzie Femright has done an incredible job in trying to cover for this breakdown in internet service. So we were a little late getting started, and we do apologize if anybody was put out by the scheduling adjustment.
That's right. We are sorry for that. We apologize. But again, these will be archived on our website. And we really thank you guys for joining us today. And I'm still taking your questions until they finally shut me off. But please do keep sending them and we will get back to you. Thank you so much. And Dan, thank you very much. You did a great job.
Thank you, Kenzie. And to all of our audience, I hope that you do follow up with us, and we'll be very happy to provide you with any additional information. So thank you, Kenzie, for your time. And we'd like to especially thank the USA Dry Pea and Lentil Council for giving us this wonderful opportunity to really address a fascinating topic. So thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you. Have a great afternoon.